So thank you for that informative presentation. Chucky talked about how science, contrary to its original purpose, which is to better the lives of the people, is being used by imperialists and capitalists to subjugate us through warfare, through terrorizing our people and destroying our planet and environment for their own profit. To combat this, we must reclaim science and technology for the people by exposing, resisting, and confronting imperialism head on, giving science and technology social importance, grounding science and technology on genuinely serving the people, and organizing science and technology workers in effecting multi-sectoral change. So thank you again, Chucky. So it is now time for the Q&A portion of our program. Our team has already compiled your questions for our speakers, and we will try to entertain all of your questions, time permitting. Feel free to keep sending in your questions through the Zoom chat or by commenting on the live stream.
Okay, so hi everyone, I'm John and I'll be facilitating this Q&A session. All right, so we have a few questions in from the audience right now. First of all, we'd like to recognize the question from Benjamin Zidar. It's for Bachir. So he says that Israel has a lot of higher education funding. So does the USA. Does this have an influence on science education and research in Lebanon? Do people leave the country for higher education or research in those places and become encultured in their colonial imperial approaches to science?
Okay, hello again. Thanks, Benjamin, for the question. So, first of all, in Lebanon, since the 90s, we've been witnessing a lot of neoliberal policies being put in place, and especially with the privatization of education and so on. So, with that also changes the goal or what is expected from higher education and from research. First of all, we don't have that much research produced, but also higher education, the goal behind it is to just produce engineers, doctors, lawyers, whatever, and export them to get remittances back again when they work abroad and when they go to the US and elsewhere. So that's firstly. Second of all, we don't and we can't travel to Palestine or to occupied Palestine. So that's for the Israeli part. But for the US, we also have a lot of people who travel abroad to the US and to Europe to like carry on with their higher education and with their research. That's mostly because of how the US mainly and also Europe are centers of research and of higher education. But at the same time, what we also have is in our own country, we also have, we might say, colonial leftovers when we're talking about the top universities being the American University of Beirut, which I'm a graduate of, and also USG, Université Saint Joseph, which is linked to the French and Lebanon also. So we don't have a very strong public education sector. We have a very big private education, and it's heavily linked with powers abroad. So that also plays back into the colonial imperial approaches to science, because we eventually adopt whatever is ingrained in this country and whatever is forced upon us, if we might say forced. So even if we're not traveling abroad, when we're not, in our own country, higher education forces us, and the privatization of education and neoliberal policies force us back into that cycle of subordination to colonial and imperialist powers.
Okay, thank you, Bashir. So hopefully that answered your question, Benjamin. Benjamin has another question. This one, I think it's a bit short. This time is for Chucky. So can science workers join the Commission 13 directly, or do they need to be part of an organization that joins ILPS?
if you don't have an organization yet, you can be an observer of ILPS Commission 13. And hopefully later on, you can form a group in your country, a collective, and then join as an organization. So I hope that answers the question. And I think it's always that saying that the more of us, the merrier, and the happier we can resist imperialism. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chucky, for that answer. So next up, we have a question from Nizar Ezraura. Solidarity from Morocco. So this is a question mainly for Bashir, but also possibly for the other speakers. It can be common, especially in post-colonial societies, to turn towards valuing technocratic governments, as you mentioned, coupled with the neo-colonial fetishizing of education as an apolitical quote-unquote social ladder. How do we center class struggle and collective organizing among science educators and academics as to break from this delusion? So, Bashir, take it away.
Yep. Thank you for the question, Nizar, and solidarity from Lebanon to Morocco as well with all that's happening. So yeah, as you're saying, we have a turn towards valuing technocratic governments, and also it's coupled with a neo-colonial fetishization of education as an apolitical social ladder. To counter that, or to break away from this delusion, as you're saying, I believe that, like as you're saying, to center class struggle and collective organizing with educators and academics is a big priority. And for that to happen, we need to be producing our own knowledge. We need to be breaking away from our dependence on, if you might say, foreign institutions or the funding that's coming from them. So we, as with everything, as with all types of production, I might say, we need to be as much self-dependent and yeah, producing as much of our own local knowledge as we can. For that to happen, we need to be putting our priorities first. We need to be breaking away from the neoliberalization of education, where with the type of economy that Lebanon ended up adopting in the 90s, we value the rentier economy. So as I talked about, we export people who are in the STEM and also in lawyers and higher education for them to work abroad. We need to break away from that. We need to restructure and give another meaning to higher education, or all education, in fact, from it being, as it is right now, just a tool to educate people that can be high earners abroad and send back remittances to Lebanon, because we have a high deficit in dollars and then foreign currency. We need to break away from that and to actually move towards a productive economy where whatever we're studying or whatever we're focusing on as an economy and as an education, it is in the best interest of our people. So that can be in producing the production of food, be self-dependent, and also in the production of knowledge that is useful for us, instead of it being just to get funding from abroad or to cater for outside reasons. No, we need to be to look more to our own issues, to look more to create solutions for our own issues. And that's how I believe we can reach it.
John, is it okay if I come in? I would like to
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
contribute
Go ahead.
to this. Yeah. Yeah, I want to just speak to this entire very, very important question about, what would be my standpoint as a post-colonial subject in a particular context of neoliberal capital and authoritarian capitalism, right? And India's experience is very interesting because in many ways, our freedom movement and subsequently the scholarship that has emerged has indigenized explorations, examinations, and I would say framings, of knowledge itself, because I don't think that, contrary to popular belief about, India being one of those tech powers, etc., our scientific contribution to the world is still very questionable, and we still love the pat on the back that can come from people who migrated to the US 3, 4 decades ago, and we still keep calling them Indian Americans, because we'd like to be associated with the US. But I would say that the humanities and the philosophical inquiries around knowledge lead me thinking that there are 4 ways to answer this question. The first, I think, is that uh, the growth of private universities in India comes with a certain contradiction. A lot of people who have returned have seen, they've studied and come back from the UK, US, and other places from Europe. They haven't found jobs in the public university, but they have converted the private university as a site of resistance, in some sense, mobilizing resources for undertaking theorization, inquiries into areas that are very political. So these are people who are using the private universities' resources and pool of money for research in order to do political kinds of questioning. And that is very important because the kind of class that this private universities attract, the students are drawn into some kinds of political questioning thanks to this subversion. The second, I think, is South-South collaborations and knowledge creation is very important. We should not look at the US and the European journals all the time for legitimacy. I think we have to just break from it, because a very important lesson as a feminist in India I have learned is that scholarship and activism are just 2 sides of the coin. I think our democracy and our churn within our institutions have always provided us the seeds of the politics of knowledge, and we should never forget that whatever it is, this is where this integration of scholarship and activism is very important. Examples have been given, even Chuckie spoke about climate change. I think the best scholars that I look up to in my country are activists par excellence. They are out there, in the field every day, getting arrested, and they write beautifully. So it's up to us to give legitimacy to this form of knowledge. And finally, I would like to say that interdisciplinarity is very important, especially in the tech surveillance area. When you talk about artificial intelligence, if you allow the engineers to write their papers about technology bias, artificial intelligence bias, discrimination, inclusion, exclusion, errors of inclusion, they will just get into this complete, that's not how we want to look at it. We really want to look at how AI is situated within a particular social system. And therefore, I think that we really need to start looking at ways by which there can be a South-South cooperation, and that's for us to frame. Thank you.
I may add also.
Okay, go ahead, Chuckie.
I think we should also stop fooling ourselves that we are doing independent studies, important studies, right? So even if we're doing critical, all those critical theories and etc., if we will still be currencies for consumption of countries, of institutions, it will not change the world. It will not move the hand of the clock. So we'll still be under imperialist control. So how much you try to, let's say, frame your researches, let's say using all those critical theories, postmodern theories, etc., etc., and if it still plays under and it still benefits institution, countries for your production capital, I think you're not doing the world a favor. So you have to really realign it, recenter it, and see to it that it will really serve the people on the ground. Even if your research is funded by the government, be sure that it will really address the real problem on the ground, not just the benefiting institutions, government. So, yeah, that's what I would want to add to that discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chuckie. So we're trying to limit this open forum session. We have to limit, sadly, this open forum session to 30 minutes. So we might not be able to accommodate all your good, wonderful questions, but we'll try our best. So the next question we have from Sarah Raimundo. So most of the active anti-imperialist organizations in the global south are peasant organizations who are struggling against imperialist plunder and war for free land redistribution, sustainable food systems, organized farmers that are moving towards agroecology for climate justice and other similar efforts. How come dominant representations of science, scientific development, or even actions against neoliberalism-driven science are largely focused on tools of high technology? Usually visuals used are scientists sitting in front of computers or in labs, even if the call is to serve the people. Even progressive studies on poverty are skewed to urban blight and sustainable urbanism without connecting these to rural poverty and the agrarian question. How does your organization or praxis address this suppression of the agrarian question, which is crucial to the national question and therefore to the national liberation struggle, which is at the heart of anti-imperialist politics? It's not directed to anyone in particular. So does anyone want to answer this question first? Um,
I'll try to
maybe
answer
okay.
that.
Okay, go ahead,
So, for
Chucky.
example, AGHAM, in its 5 concerns, it addresses the need for national industrialization, the need for a genuine agrarian reform. So it's at the heart of the push of AGHAM to make science really work for the people. Maybe we see presentations looking at cell phones, high technology, but we should not also be remiss that at the heart of the discussion, hopefully, all this science and technology organization really try to address how land is really valuable, how a genuine agrarian reform will really address problems of the global south, how it ties up, it ties to national industrialization, that without the other one, it will result to nothing. How can you liberate the people if you don't, if you're pushing for national industrialization, but peasants will not have access to or given their bourgeois democratic rights to vote, for example? How can you actually push for national industrialization if there's no land to till? If companies, if landlords are the owners of the vast majority of the land in your country. So, for example, AGHAM and its other chapters like AGHAM educators are in direct working directly with, for example, with LUMAD schools, or LUMAD are national minorities in the Philippines who are being displaced, who are being threatened, who are being killed by the government. So one of the roles, or one of the projects of AGHAM is to address the need for education, and that education is centered at agriculture. So at the heart of it is genuine agrarian reform. So hopefully, science and technology organization will not just be proselytizing, or will not just be shouting at that this should be done, this should be the research that should be created. They should go to the ground and learn from the people, because if you will not go and learn from the masses, your science is not grounded on truth. It's grounded on flimsy. It's anchored on clouds that will fall under the weight of the need to benefit, that people should benefit from science and technology. Hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, so do any of the other speakers want to add anything to that? Um, okay, if not, I guess we can proceed to the next question. Okay, so the next question is for Anita. It looks like as though a lot of the issues in many countries are problems rooted in colonial in colonial history. Is the issue of surveillance capitalism in India driven by foreign or former colonial powers, or is much of it driven by Indian capitalists themselves?
The truth is that there are many forces at play. Undeniably, there is, that the top 7 companies by market capitalization today in the world are American digital companies. And then 2 of them, of the 10, are Chinese digital companies, right? So the world is bipolar in a new way. China's AI or American AI, and China is basically getting a lot into standard setting, open standards for its IoT devices and all of that. And through its Belt and Road Initiative, it's taking all of that to many, many countries in Southeast Asia and Africa and other continents, etc. So there is recently, the Indian government has had its, issues with the Chinese government. So suddenly we do not believe in Chinese products anymore. So there is a tension of nationalism that continues to play in terms of how you decide what kind of, capitalisms you will choose. Of course, people still prefer Chinese goods. Why am I saying this? American media, social media, American companies, and all the surveillance tech uh, corporations, which are number one, the GAFA, basically, they rule the roost in India as well. Our domestic alternatives in the platform economy are very, very few. Not that they don't exist. We have unicorns. Many times these unicorns are bought over through venture capital. Amazon is just waiting and then it will scoop it up. So they just wait and then scoop up. So Uber Eats really poses a lot of competition to Swiggy. But anyway, Swiggy is doing very well. And there's no doubt that some American company will scoop up Swiggy as well. It's one of those food delivery apps. So what I want to say is the era of digital capitalism is very much a war between the US and China. India will talk about nationalistic, digital infrastructure, data infrastructure, and all of that. But that is caught within a very strong nexus with domestic capital. So we really don't have a decentralized market out there. We don't have economic democracy. And this is a battle that we really need to fight because it's not about platform capitalism. All core industries in agriculture, manufacturing are going to go digital. It's not just digital services alone. Increasingly, as there is going to be an integration of automation with traditional industry, with forms of agriculture, remote controlled, smart agriculture, precision farming, what have you, everything is going to get digitalized. So we better watch out in terms of how global capital is going to call the shots, and any form of domestic capital that has any claims to become international, like our domestic capitalists, they Geo launched a new platform to compete with Zoom, and it's selling it in Africa and Latin America as the next best alternative. So I will stop there, saying that it's a complex political economy question, and we don't really have alternatives in terms of an alternative economic model rooted in the social and solidarity economy. No, we don't.
I would like to add something.
Okay, go ahead, Chucky.
Okay, so the Philippines, with all the calls for stop the killings in the Philippines, especially as a result of the war on the poor by the government, um, even with the global support to stop these killings, the UK government is still selling surveillance equipment to the Philippines. So you see that the politics at play here, the political play at play here is that how do we address this? That there's that call to stop the killings of environmental defenders, to stop the killing of the poor in a country like the Philippines, with the support of other developed so-called developed countries, but you still have these imperialist countries trying to sell us these kinds of equipment because there are some treaties or aids that are being given to us. So yeah, we have to know and confront these realities. So it's just an added info, maybe not an answer to that question. Thank you.
Okay, so if there are no more inputs from our speakers, we can proceed to the last question from the audience. So yeah, again, sadly, we do not have enough time to accommodate a lot more questions. But if you guys still have questions that you want to ask our speakers, feel free to email us at the email that was shown earlier by Chucky. You can send in your questions there. We'll relate to the speakers and then we'll send you back the answer. So if you guys have any pressing questions left over that we do not have the time to entertain right now, please feel free to send us an email. Okay, so for our last audience question, we have a question from Anita. So for Anita, so what are your thoughts on the means we can use to expose platforms like Facebook, Uber, etc. Surveillances? I guess in a sense, how can we work to expose the surveillance nature of these platforms?
May I request Bashir to take that because Bashir has typed that he'd like to answer it. I can come in and maybe add a couple of sentences to complement what he says.
Bashir, would
Bashir,
you like to?
did you want to?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Oh, you tagged the question that you wanted to answer it live. Would you want to say something about the question or?
On exposing platforms.
No, I think I'm good. It's
Oh, okay. So go ahead, Anita.
Okay, all right. So thanks. This is, I guess, this is a question like, what do you do about capitalism? So, and it's even more complicated because global social media. For a long time, people ask this question hypothetically: can you build a search engine from scratch? Today, can you build social media from scratch today? The answer to it is technologically it's not possible because of the network advantage, right? Once you're on the internet and you kind of have a first mover advantage, then over a period of time you accumulate data and you move on the network and you occupy the market. That is why there is monopolistic tendency in digital business, right? So the only way to do it is to really bring in both global and national or domestic legislation. You have to be really strong. With respect to platform companies, a competition law is very, very important. I think taxation, international taxation is a very important instrument. Today, we don't have any treaties that really talk about this hyper-liberalization of cross-border data flows. As a country, developing countries will have to retain some amount of data for their own efforts, for their own state to be able to invest data in processes of knowledge creation, for organizing production, etc. And there are other instruments which can be used, including of labor rights. And I think what I see is that the ILO is playing a very good role, and we need to give impetus to those international efforts. And I can see in my country a lot of delivery workers, a lot of Uber drivers organizing post-COVID because their incentives have been slashed. They don't even receive minimum wages. And this has to become a global movement. So as an organization, we are supporting these unions with research and bringing them together and have some kind of discursive power to influence consumers. With social media, the question is very complicated. Again, it requires two kinds of things. Scholars have pointed out, technology scholars have pointed out that, you can have a public alternative to social media, but the question is, do we trust our states? Are our national television, public media, are they adequately independent and autonomous? They are not. So what's the guarantee that a publicly run social media will really be pro-people? It will just be a propaganda machine, right? The other ways to look at it is that internationally, we have to come together for some kinds of data-based rules, a rule of law global framework, which refers to both cybersecurity, safety, war, peace, and the rest, and think about the role of social media through a normative standard setting at the international level, and that requires a lot of work. National law, for instance, our organization is going to be working on the intermediary liabilities question. We have a set of rules for social media platforms and how to regulate content, right? The fear all of us have as activists is if we go and touch it, we will lose our freedoms, because it's a delicate balance. We know that there is a lot of hate speech, but we're very afraid to say anything to the government, because when the government meddles with these things, it's going to really start, taking away what little we have as activists. But sexism and misogyny in online platforms, I think it's a scam, it's a racket, it's a pandemic of global proportions. And as an organization, we are taking a view that in the coming year or so, our government has to do something about it. And our constitution does not recognize, it does recognize hate speech, but it does not use gender as a ground for hate speech. And that has to change, because it's so easy to commit these crimes. And we have to hold social media accountable through these legislations at the national level, and think about what to do in terms of a global norm setting, which is not voluntary, which has to be binding. But there are complications because developing countries also do not trust the human rights process, but there's no way. It's a kind of a dialectic which we have to live with.
Okay, thank you, Anita. So again, I guess that ends our the open forum part of our program. So in case you guys still have questions or any additional insights that you want to direct to our speakers, feel free to send them to our email. So I've sent the emails that you can send your questions to in the Zoom chat. It's Science and Tech Commission 13 at ilps.info or ilpscommission13 at gmail.com. So you can send an email to either of those addresses and we will try to accommodate your questions there. Okay, so I'll hand it back over to Abby. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much again to all our speakers, as well as everyone who participated in the Q&A. Please stay for a few more minutes for the photo op while we close the seminar. So the general theme of the presentations for today touches on how science and technology is unfortunately in the wrong hands. The power of innovation is wielded by entities and corporations that only seek profit and terror, when science and technology could instead be used to overturn the system of oppression and suppression that we are all victims of right now. So one of Bachir's many strong points earlier was that we can't push for solutions that are purely technical, not just based on an objective or singular truth. We need to infuse our solutions with politics and social consciousness so we can make sure that science serves communities. We must boycott academia that focuses on molding young scientists to orient their science into creating weapons or terraforming land, ultimately helping imperialists in their goal to subjugate us. When education is used like this and data is being hidden by those in power, it is clear that we are not listening to the right scientists. Anita, in her presentation, exposes how surveillance capitalism hides behind an innocent front, social media, online shopping, even national IDs, but in actuality, erodes democracy, our privacy, and our freedom. The social media sites that we are on at some point every day even encourage hate speech and violence, and even our own DNA is being profited from. So in this technological age where we are always online and we use our devices for almost everything, we must demand for accountability to limit or eliminate these dangers. So Chuckie, for his part, discussed how science and technology is a weapon under imperialism, causing hunger and poverty, massive environmental destruction, and inaccessibility of social services. Many countries are very rich in natural resources, but because of these parasite imperialists, our own resources are being depleted and destroyed only to be exported and never enjoyed by their hosts. Capitalists monopolize production and capital through science and technology at the expense of the lives of innocent people. So across our three speakers and their wonderful, very insightful presentations, what is common is what we must do to reorient science and technology to genuinely serve the people. And that is to arouse, organize, and mobilize science and technology workers and band with international movements to enact system change and break free of imperialist control. Only when science and technology is realigned to the interests of the people will we be liberated. And with that, we end our program and the second day of the webinar, Research and Destruction, the Role of Science in Waging Imperialist War and Fighting for Just Peace. Thank you so much to everyone who attended. And now, for those who want to join the photo op, please stay on the webinar so we can add you to the screen for the screenshot. For those who don't, you may now leave the room. Again, thank you very much, and we hope to see you in ILPS Committee 13's future projects and activities.